Welcome to the Global Future Mobility Virtual Conference. In this panel session, we will be discussing the topic, the fate of automakers. Will the giants crash? The future of the auto industry is going to look like the history of the cell phone. The two even share the same technology, the lithium-ion battery. As the world's automakers gradually switch from combustion to charging, some of today's dominant car companies will share the fate of some of the few former titans of the smartphone. We have two panel speakers. We have Johannes Berg. He is the Managing Director of the Digital Hub Logistics Hamburg. He holds an MBA in Innovation Management from the Vlerick Business School and Gent and Stellenbosch University in South Africa and has over 10 years of experience in managing international innovation projects in sectors such as energy, logistics, mobility, and semiconductors. Johannes is interested in sustainable business models and how digitization can help to use resources more efficiently and effectively. For our second panel speaker, we have Dr. Jose Seras Pereira, who started his professional career in powertrain research and then spent almost 10 years at Jaguar Land Rover in the UK, covering roles spanning R&D, product engineering, and long-term strategy and planning. He joined the mobility consulting group of the Frost & Sullivan in 2019 to contribute more widely to the sustainability challenges facing the industry. So welcome, Johannes and Dr. Jose. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Just a reminder, when you're not talking, can you please mute yourself? Okay, so I'm going to start with the questions. A technological tsunami has been upturning the automotive industry over the last decade, and it's widely agreed that the future of cars will be one, electric, second, autonomous, and third, connected. I'm going to ask Johannes first. As this becomes a foregone conclusion, how will the automotive market develop, and what will the associated product roadmaps look like?
So thanks a lot, Sarah, and thanks for having me today at the conference. Let me first start by saying that I'm not an automotive expert as such. I would rather consider myself experienced in knowing how certain industries deal with innovation cycles and new product launches, changes in business models, etc. And from that standpoint, coming from my current work in logistics, we also have lots of contacts and details actually from the automotive and mobility world, because these two interlink very much. I would say that that the title of this session is well picked. However, I think that not all giants will fall. Many giants will struggle. A few giants will maybe take a big leap forward, and others will struggle very hard in the context of moving towards e-mobility. I think just having the recent developments, coming from a country where we have some of the world's largest automotive producers, and seeing what is going on. The conclusions are a bit close to call yet. Of course, it will be at one stage autonomous, and it will definitely be connected. If it will be electric, the question is, will it be battery powered? Are we very certain about that? Or is there still the hydrogen card in the game? Because we're seeing that many Asian companies are also putting some money at least, or some skin in the game on hydrogen. Nevertheless, I think we will move away from combustion. That is very certain. We've just had a big economic stimulus package here in Germany, where there was a big debate on whether we should put a premium for consumers on buying combustion engine cars. That was neglected by the government. So there is no money for the car industry going into combustion. Coming back to the second part of the question, I think what we've seen basically all around the world, that the concept of sharing mobility, and whether it's micro-mobility, whether it's renting a car or a truck, that will become even more prominent in the years to come, and that will of course put some constraints or some pressure on the traditional revenue streams of automakers, of car producers.
The legal challenge facing autonomous driving lies in changing and supplementing existing laws and regulations that never foresaw the advent of self-driving connected vehicles. No matter how strong the desire to speed up the transition, it will only happen as fast as several important and powerful pieces are put together, including technology, standards, infrastructure, legislation, and consumer readiness. Dr. Jose, how will government legislation keep pace with the new technologies while also addressing questions of liability?
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning again, and thank you for having me at this conference. I think in terms of, like Johannes said, there's lots of different market dynamics playing out right now, in a number of different, areas. Obviously, the automotive industry, where I come from, has been talking about some of these mega trends for the past, 5 to 7 years already, usually talked about in the ACE acronyms or the CASE acronyms, connected, autonomous, electrified, and shared. So these are themes that we're all familiar with. Of course, the challenges are how these will progress going forward. In my opinion, you mentioned some of these. EVs are already here in terms of technology, right? Clearly, they're still a little expensive for most consumers, but the technology is robust and it's developing faster and faster than anyone thought. So EVs are here. Connected, I think, is here already. In Europe, we've got systems like emergency call activated now on all vehicles. 5G is obviously coming in. So the next 5 to 10 years are going to become mainstream connectivity within vehicles, just like we're used to our smartphones. So these are two trends, I think, that are already moving fast. Clearly, they will change depending on some sectors. So EVs are suited to smaller vehicles, lighter vehicles, shorter range use cases. In terms of government legislation, obviously safety is a critical responsibility and interest of governments. So anything to do with battery safety and liability is a critical aspect that's being looked at by governments in terms of transport as well. Insurance liabilities on the connectivity side, data protection is a big thing. Obviously here in Europe, with GDPR. So data protection aspects, privacy, how we maintain, these ring fences around the technology to protect consumers is a critical aspect as well. So things like blockchain, in terms of technology, are clearly things that might be leveraged in the future to try and protect consumers in this way. In terms of other legislative aspects, obviously, hydrogen was talked about by Johannes is another critical fuel vector that's having a lot of attention at the moment. Again, it has lots of safety implications around interaction with consumers. It's new technology consumers are not used to. So there is a lot of learning and education that needs to be put in place. Even with electric vehicles that have been around for the past 10 to 15 years, there's still confusion from the consumers. So governments will have to play a much more proactive role if they want to roll out these technologies and speed up their deployment, and being much more of a partner with industry, holding the hand of the consumer into this new world. Otherwise, this transition will take much longer than people want it to take.
Johannes, is there anything you want to add? What about the legislation in Hamburg or in Germany? How is it?
Yeah, I think Jose has pointed out all the relevant aspects. I mean, looking at Germany in particular, and particularly focusing on the autonomy and the connecting part of things, there's a whole bundle of legislation that needs to be put in place or even changed. I mean, the Germans still love their cars. We have in many areas on our highways no speed limit. That would probably have to be put in place to take the autonomy aspect of things a little bit forward. But that being said, I think Jose has touched on all relevant aspects there.
Yeah, I guess the one thing I would add, Sarah, is
Yes.
is the autonomous side. Obviously, autonomous vehicles and driving. Obviously, the legislation is hugely underdeveloped, and on that side of things, clearly there are a lot of working groups internationally, but trying to align the operating frameworks for autonomous vehicles is a huge challenge, let alone the technological challenges. So I think that is a space that's going to need some more time to mature. I think the industry is beginning to realize, and governments are beginning to realize, that some of those opportunities will have to wait a little bit until we work out how to implement these technologies in the real world safely.
When it does work out, where do you think would be the first place that would see? Which city would it be using autonomous driving?
I've just seen, if I may jump in here first, I've just seen a nice documentary yesterday evening about a new highway being built from the south to the north in the city of Cairo in Egypt. And what they do, they simply build a highway through urban populated areas, no prisoners taken, so to say, just in order to build the highway. Very highly densely populated area in which I think we will, for example, not see autonomous vehicles driving at first. I think what we always miss in the discussions, at least in Germany and many parts of Europe, is that we always focus on the cities, and we have also very, very large regional and metropolitan areas which are not so densely populated, maybe, where it could be potentially easier to test, trial, and validate autonomous road infrastructures. We here in Hamburg, we will have the Intelligent Transport System World Congress happening next year in October 2021. And we have an autonomous test area throughout the city center over a few kilometers, where we will have public transportation being tested on an autonomous level. There are many cities and communities around Europe, the US, I think. So there will not be this one place which will simply jump ahead. I think there will be many different regions testing that. And on top of that, I think what's very important to stress is that if we talk about these three things, EV, autonomy, connectivity, it's also a thing how fast the OEMs can really change from focusing on drivetrains, etc., and building up a very big software company. Like automobile producers have to become software companies. And where that is happening the fastest, I think we will then also see real life autonomy on the streets.
And there will also be development of automobiles that will not require human interaction at all, but purely software for movement. Now, how do you feel about this? Dr. Jose, you want to answer first?
Yeah, as Johannes said, the challenges from a safety perspective are very big. So we've had last year, some incidents in the US with Uber testing vehicles and getting into an accident, and the whole program was stopped for over a year. I think society, likes the idea of some of these technologies, but I don't think we're ready yet to accept some of the consequences. Aside from all the technical liability and legal aspects, just that we're not. Society is so complex, with kids running out into the street, simple things that we don't think about on a daily basis. Those are extremely difficult use cases, edge cases for technology to pick up robustly. And until we as a society kind of accept some of those risks, even though statistically we might be able to bring the fatality levels down if we did deploy some of this technology earlier, because obviously we know that there are huge numbers of traffic accidents every year resulting in fatalities. But I don't think we have the conversation is yet kind of at a level that is mature enough to weigh those different risks, to say, we accept if we bring levels down of general accidents and fatalities, then we're ready to accept some edge case accidents with this technology. I think it's a challenge for us to accept that. I think, again, we need to progress that conversation, and we might be in a better place. But these are things that I think take a lot of time to develop. In terms of cities, I think we need to talk about China. Obviously, clearly, China has not just the financial power. It has the political frameworks. It has the technology in terms of software, in terms of telecommunications. We have big established companies like Baidu and Tencent already involved, and Alibaba already involved in collaboration with major OEMs on autonomous driving. And they have the capability in many large cities, with over 1 million people population, to completely control, to a greater extent, parts of those city centers and transform them into autonomous centers very quickly, if they wanted to. I think that's more challenging to do in Europe and in the US, also from a physical infrastructure perspective, because of the ways the cities are developed. It's more of a challenge, but I think there are big opportunities in China. If they wanted to push ahead with a pilot, showcase cities, I think they could do it quite easily.
Want to add something?
Yeah, I think from my side, thanks a lot. To add is that what Jose has rightfully pointed out, it's the societal and the human factor in it. If we look into logistical ecosystems, to harbors, to intralogistic operations, there is already close to 100% of autonomy happening in the harbor of Singapore or of Hamburg or Antwerp or Rotterdam. There are autonomous vehicles transporting containers 24/7. Well, there's not a lot of human interaction, of course. So the societal and human factor is important. And also, I think what we need to take into account and address clearly is that, for example, when the steam engines were introduced over 100 years ago, when the first cars hit the road also over 100 years ago, there were many casualties. And we have lots of people still dying in non-autonomous transportation and mobility. And if you see a Tesla on autonomous drive crashing somewhere in the US into a truck, it's a huge story, and a couple of people unfortunately dying. But we will not make that way towards autonomy if we don't take these unfortunate casualties into account. That's the path innovation and technological advance has to go. If we don't want that to happen, then it will probably not happen. And I agree with Jose. China is probably a leap ahead in also not only having the technology and the infrastructure, but accepting the price that innovation comes with.
This makes me think that the next topic should be around what you mentioned is about ethics. So moving on, automakers face the hard questions as they jockey for a position, from thinking about their value proposition, which core capabilities they need, which players they should partner with, as we know collaboration is huge, to developing business models that offer the best go-to-market strategies and the best chances to win. So in your opinion, I would ask Dr. Jose first, which business models will win in this new industry?
It's a very challenging question. The comparison is usually made, as you mentioned in the introduction, with telecommunications and what we saw, after the dot-com bubble from 2000 to 2010, the rise of Apple and the dominance that they've shown over the last 10 years, as well as other examples, streaming services and things like Netflix. Yeah, so these titans of industry, Kodak, disappearing to Instagram, and Nokia to Apple, and Blockbuster to Netflix. I think that a lot of parallels are drawn with the automotive industry, which are fair in many ways in terms of the speed of innovation that's coming in from outside the industry and disrupting some of the existing players. Having said that, there are things that I think people miss. That the one thing that industry had in terms of the ability to disrupt the traditional incumbents were an ability to scale quickly in terms of deploying their solutions. So Netflix, leveraging the transition to online streaming and faster broadband, etc., could really scale up their service offering and reduce friction in the whole process. Apple, the same thing. Kodak, Instagram, okay, it's just a different use case pivoting to the internet in terms of sharing of media. Now, the automotive industry, number one, is much more complex in terms of as a product to manufacture and assemble, right, using thousands of suppliers and components. So it's not something that you can just come in with an idea and disrupt it. The supply chains are hugely complicated, which is why you see new alliances like, Rivian and Nikola on the hydrogen side, bringing in existing players in the industry to try and create a new kind of ecosystem that can take the technology forward. And then obviously examples like Tesla, who have been doing it for 20 years on their own and very successfully. But the point is that it's not that easy to kind of implement some of these ideas. On the business model side, so to take that onto the business models, there are clearly lots of ideas on the mobility side, with micromobility, with ride sharing, and how to kind of create new revenue streams out of all of this. And I think what you've seen recently is kind of the technology-heavy players dominate. So, the Amazons, the Ubers, really expanding their technology platforms to leverage all of these different use cases. So Uber starts as a taxi service, now it's delivering food, it's doing all sorts of other things, it's getting into healthcare, specific use cases in terms of transporting people to hospitals and back. So, clearly, profitability is a challenge for these new startups, even though the ideas are very exciting. So they will be the ones driving the business model innovation, because they're trying to leverage the full benefits of the platform, right? The synergies of their technology platforms. I think the OEMs will be more conservative by nature. They have brands and reputations to protect. Clearly, it's a risk. They may end up like Nokia and Kodak. But they're aware of those risks. They're trying to manage those risks and navigate through them. But they clearly don't have the risk appetite that some of these big other players that are private equity backed. So they naturally will have more risk, a lower risk appetite, let's say.
Yes, because it is expensive, and which is why the older OEMs or the older players, they have the advantage in terms of budget they can spend.
This is true, but they also have more bureaucratic structures internally to agree how those funds are spent, and they also have shareholders who might, not be as risk what's the word who are not as encouraged by the risk-taking activities of companies like Tesla and Uber.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge. Obviously Johannes can talk to the specific environment and culture in Germany. But aside from the VW example, a lot of money on the table with electrification. Obviously, a lot of it because of the opportunity to reinvent itself after the visa scandal. A lot of the other German companies are still relatively conservative about where exactly to focus their investments.
Johannes?
Yeah, I think once again I can agree with everything Jose has said. To give you an example from Germany, we've of course have Volkswagen, who is struggling very hard to actually bring their new EV fleet on the market, the ID series, which is still a little bit behind. The electrical vehicles that Daimler has on the road are, and everybody can read up on that, are not selling as well as expected. And here comes Tesla and announces to build the first European gigafactory in the backyard of all the very proud and old and established German car manufacturers in the state of Brandenburg. And they're not going to just build this gigafactory, they're going to do it in 1 year. So they started building, and the plan is to have the first cars rolling off the ramp there in a year's time. And that is, of course, showing that these companies, Tesla just being the most prominent example, move ahead a lot faster than the old tankers can do, because of all the bureaucracy, because of all the regulatory, also labor union issues, which are a good thing, I believe, but that shows that these companies are moving ahead faster. And the question is, I think in terms of business model, it's still too close to call, I believe, because are you going to stick to the idea of being a car manufacturer, or do you want to become a mobility service provider? BMW has actually shifted back. They said, we want to become a mobility service provider. They have shifted back their strategy and saying, let's focus on what we can do best. We have a very, very strong, successful brand over the last decades, almost a century. and we can build the best cars. That's our key benefit. We're not going to really focus on playing around in too much service aspects for mobility. So again, coming back to the title of the session, I think some giants will really struggle, depending on how fast they really can clarify what their unique selling point and real added value and benefit is. But we will also see the need still for individual mobility, I think, will not disappear even throughout this Corona thing, or maybe because of it, the need or the wish for individual mobility will still be prominent. So there will be the cake for car producers may become a little bit smaller, but it will still be nice and revenue full.
Yes, the collaboration and partnership is important. Talking about Corona that you mentioned just now, China is the biggest car market, and Wuhan, which is the center of the outbreak, is known as a motor city, for being home to auto plants. And as the coronavirus spread, many auto companies across the country closed down their doors as part of the recent nationwide shutdown. How has this affected the automotive industry in your country? So, Dr. Jose, I don't know whether you want to reply for you're currently in Portugal or in UK. Can you share how is it?
Yeah, I mean, from a UK perspective, obviously, I was ex Jaguar Land Rover, and I think it was widely reported in the press, along with many other brands, that there were clearly supply challenges. Like I said before, an automotive vehicle is made up of thousands of parts, and they all come together at the brand's assembly line. So just one missing component, that is not necessarily an easily accessible one on the outside that you can make later, you can stop the production line completely. And this is indeed what happened, a few months ago, that we had critical components not being able to leave China. And I think Jaguar had an interesting story in the press about literally putting components in suitcases and flying them into the UK to keep the production line going. So, going forward, obviously, we talk a lot about supply chain kind of redesign, reshoring, nearshoring, some of these things. Again, these are clearly things that companies will look at to try and avoid the impacts of a similar event in the future. But it's very challenging to do in practice. Again, you might be able to do it on one type of component or another, but again, to bring those thousands of components together, it's not feasible to bring the supply chain back to Europe. At least in my opinion, I don't think it's feasible even from a cost perspective. These are things that have developed over the past 20, 30 years. You can't just change them overnight. So I think it is what it is. We're going to have to accept some of the fragilities in the system. It's not as something that clearly companies like to admit and digest, but there's only so much one can do in terms of redesigning supply chains within the 12-month period. Having said that, what you see is the new players, like Tesla, for example, and others, like a company called Arrival, which is a UK company that's had recent investment from Hyundai, making delivery vans all electric, and has an interesting concept of local small micro factories. I think this is one way to kind of mitigate some of these risks. So instead of these big supply chains that bring all the components back to a single manufacturing plant, you go to where the market is, and you establish micro factories to support the specific markets. That's not something that the OEMs have done yet, at least not at that scale. It's an interesting idea. Clearly, there's a lot of fixed infrastructure on the ground that makes it challenging for OEMs to just abandon and move to that model. So clearly, there's an opportunity for new entrants to adopt some of these leaner manufacturing strategies. And again, they will obviously have advantages if they do that.
No, he pointed out everything. I think looking at Europe, at least, because I can't really judge upon the other areas, but I think it would have looked the same. The only, if you want to say so, positive aspect or lucky aspect in more fragile supply chains during the last weeks and months has been that the car producers also didn't face a lot of demand. No, so they stopped their, I know from Volkswagen that they not necessarily stopped their production because the supply chain broke down or got fragile, but they simply didn't have any demand. And what's the use of producing cars that you put on a parking lot and wait until they are bought? So that also came into the situation, supply and demand decreasing.
Thank you, Johannes, and thank you, Dr. Jose, for sharing your insights with us. To our viewers, please continue to share your opinions and any questions, or you want to chat in the chat box. We'll return back at 11:45 to discuss our next topic, which is future parking solutions for individual vehicles and urban traffic management. See you then.